God be with you. Oh, no, rewind. Christ is risen. That's it, because it's still Easter. Kyle, they didn't get the memo to wear hats and jean jackets and black pants. You guys need to read your emails. So if you're just tuning in, if this is your first time with us or it's been a hot minute, what we're doing this Easter season is we're talking about why Easter and resurrection matters. We're looking at how these truths at the very heart of our faith can literally change how we see the world. They can literally change how we live, and therefore, they can change our lives and they can change our world. We're spending some time kind of getting at this really important truth that we kind of assume, but we don't name enough. This truth that says what we believe matters. And so we're looking at why these beliefs around Easter matter, not just theologically and not just conceptually, but why do they matter on a day-to-day basis about how we live and move and have our being. And we've already talked about a few things. You can go find those on YouTube. You can find them on Spotify. But today, as we continue our journey through Easter, I thought we would begin by talking about the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. You know what that is? Does anyone else know what that is? Totally cool. Okay, some of you. You all probably know what it is. You just haven't done what Brad and I have done and Google, what is it called when you start seeing something everywhere? That's the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. It's that phenomenon that scientists call this thing where once you start thinking about something, or once you start reading about something, or once you want something, it is everywhere. And for me, I first started picking this up when I realized that the car I really, really want, and I am not a car guy in any way, shape, or form. I just think it looks really cool. The car that I really want is like a matte black Ford Bronco. And it's like, that's the car I want. And suddenly it's everywhere. Everyone is driving it, which does not do anything to quell my desire for one. It just makes me want to have one more. But anyone ever experienced that? Yeah, that's the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. And this is all just a really lame segue into what we really want to talk about. Because the other way this happens for me, and this is a byproduct or a consequence of what I do for a living, is that everywhere I go, people talk about church and faith. Wherever I go, there's always a conversation going on about God or faith or spirituality. And on the one hand, it's amazing because people are talking about faith and spirituality and what it means to be human. It's like, yes, let's talk about that. But on the other hand, it's always a take that I disagree with. And so I can't not but listen and just be like, oh, that is so wrong. No, I disagree with this. You need to know about this, and this. And it's always on a plane ride where you can't escape it. And you're just like sitting there and the people in the back row are like, oh yeah, like this, they're going to hell. And like, no, they're not. No, but you can't do anything about it because you know that's not an argument you can win. Anyways, all that to say is the other week, I was at a coffee shop trying to write this thing. And there were these two girls at the table next. And they were talking about church. And so while I pretended to do my work and just like eavesdropped on their conversation, because it's all in the name of God, right? They were talking about why they left their church and why church doesn't do it for them anymore. And I was like, oh, tell me more. Because the research on this is like fascinating. It is super fascinating what the research is showing in a post-COVID world. Because while church attendance is going up amongst younger people, there's been a dramatic shift. Why people are leaving the church or why people are changing churches is changing. And there's a few reasons, but I think number 3 on the list is this reason, and I'd put it like this. It's because of a failure to make space for real and heavy questions. People are leaving the church because of this failure on the church's behalf to make space for real and heavy questions. They're leaving because of this tendency churches have to give easy and shallow answers for hard and deep questions. It's how churches fail to make room and make space to speak to our humanity and lived experience. And I'm curious if you have ever experienced that. I know I've experienced this. I go and we have these deep-seated questions, and we've been through something rough and terrible, and the answer we get is just so unsatisfying. And not in the way where like you just need to sit with it some more to kind of get it, but it's like you're not listening. You're not honoring it the right way. You're just kind of appeasing me. And right under how churches treat LGBTQ community, and right under the emptiness of church, kind of the hypocrisy side of it, is this failure to give good answers and responses to our lived experience. And that's what those girls were talking about. Which broke my heart a little bit, because if there should be anywhere in our world where we should deal with real and heavy stuff, it's here. This is where we should actually get into the stuff that matters on a deep level. Even if there's no clear answer, this is the forum where we deal with it. And it broke my heart that these girls and so many people leave because we failed to even address it. And so as those girls were talking, they started talking about the questions the church wasn't able to handle. And one of them said it's the question of why bad and evil and awful things happen. And time again, she was saying she brought this church the question of why do bad things happen? And she couldn't get a good answer. And that's a real and heavy and legit question. It's one that like at least 6 of you have asked for Ask Anything Sunday. So we'll get into that one there. But then this really beautiful, elegant thing happened in the conversation, where the other girl kind of shifted the whole thing, because she said for her it is less the question of why do they happen that made her leave the church. And it's more because they could not tell her what to do when bad things happen. It was because the church failed to give her an adequate response of what to do when bad, evil, awful, terrible things happen. And as I listened to that, I was like, yes, girl, preach. And I fought the temptation to go and give her a high five, because like, that is my sermon right there. Thank you. Because that's the question that I've had too. And I think that's a really good question of what do we do when bad and evil and awful things happen? Because they do happen, right? I mean, as uncomfortable as it might be to name this, and as much as we like church to be a safe refuge where we can go and just relax and be at peace and sing our songs and know that everything is okay, let's just be bold and courageous. You know, as we say back home, you know, not everything is puppy dogs, rainbows, and a bag of chips, right? Life is hard. Bad things happen. And we all know this. Just watch the news for 5 minutes. Scroll on your phone for 30 seconds. Walk through the neighborhoods, and we know bad, awful, evil things happen. There are things in our world that rub our humanity the wrong way, right? There are things that break our souls, right? There are things that we instinctually know should not happen. There are things that go on in us and around us that almost betray something deep within us, right? Anyone know what we're talking about? Can we all kind of acknowledge that this exists? Can we all acknowledge that this exists? See, we're scared to talk about it, which I get. I'm terrified to do this too. But I think it's really important that we name it And we can understand these evil, awful things in all kinds of ways. I'm not going to get into that today. So whether we want to understand these things as supernatural in some way, whether we want to talk about them as a consequence of sin or see them as larger issues around systemic injustice and corruption and oppression, however we want to hold it, I think it's a good practice for us just to acknowledge that there's bad things in our world. And we'll save the why question for later. We'll do that some other day because it's just a lot. But as we talk about why Easter and resurrection matter, I want to go to that other girl's question. And I want to talk today about how do we react? How do we respond to those evil, bad, dark things that happen in our lives and our world? And I want to talk about that today because the truth is, what I've been learning is that how we respond to evil is a spiritual issue. How we respond to it is a spiritual issue. How we respond to evil and injustice and suffering is a spiritual issue because spirituality has everything to do with how we understand the universe to work. That's what we're talking about when we talk about spirituality. And I know that word gets used in all kinds of ways these days, and I think that's lovely. I love that there's a renaissance of all things spiritual. But when we use that word here, in the church, what we're talking about is the thing behind the thing, behind the thing, behind the thing. We're talking about what is true on the deepest of levels. We're talking about the very foundations and support systems of the universe. We're talking about the base notes of our reality. We're talking about the things that hold it all together, that gives it shape and gives it direction. We're talking about the why behind it all. When we talk about spirituality, what we're ultimately talking about is what is real and what is true. Are you with me? That's what we're talking about when we talk spirituality. What is real and what is true? It's our understanding of how does a universe fundamentally work? And then faith is a trust in that way. And those are kind of two sides of the coin. Spirituality is like, how does it all work? What is true? What is real? What is good? And faith is a trust that, okay, I trust that. I'm going to surrender myself to that spirit, to that way of being. And I love that spirituality has become one of our core values because that is what we do here. That's why spaces like this matter. That's why we come back to Jesus again and again and again and again, because we want to ground ourselves in what is real and true. Because, and here's the kicker, here's the thing that we need to remember today. Because what is real and true determines how we think, feel, and act. What we know to be real and true determines how we think, feel, and act. And we know this, right? On some level like this, yeah, I get it, Nick. No, yeah, obviously. But it's good to remember this thing. Because we know that how we think about God matters. We know that if we think God is an angry, wrathful, judgmental God who wants to punish people who are sinful, we know that changes how we see people. We know that literally has an effect on our interactions with people. We know that if we value above all else money and wealth, that changes how we treat the earth. That changes how we interact with the environment, right? We know, this is a big one, this is an easy one, this is a painful one. We know that if we see ourselves as unworthy, unlovable, and not enough, we will say awful things to ourselves. And we will change how we live and move and have our being because of that, right? Yeah, our base notes matter. Our beliefs matter. Our values matter. What we think is real and true determines how we think, act, and behave. And one of the core questions spirituality always asks is, what's true? what is real? What are the core values of the universe? What is the thing underneath the thing underneath the thing? What does it all boil down to? And therefore, how do I live and move and have my being? What does it mean to be human and alive in the world? And in a lot of ways, and by that I mean like in every way, this is what we talk about when we talk about the way of Jesus. It is this way of understanding the universe that he gives us. It is this way of understanding this is how the universe works. This is what it was designed for. This is how to be within it. And then we therefore find out how we need to live, how we need to look, how we need to behave, to be in line with that way the universe was meant to be. And so when it comes to evil, when it comes to those awful, bad, terrible things that we don't want to talk about, it's there we find our response. It's there we find the first thing that we have to do whenever bad, awful, terrible things happen. We go back to what we know to be real and true. The first thing that we have to do when everything hits the fan, it all goes sideways, we got to stop and ask, what is real and true? What is the thing underneath the thing, underneath the thing, underneath the thing? Because we can experience it all, and we should experience it all. We should feel it, we should lament it, we should be shaken and undone by it, but then, and this is where the work kicks in, this is where faith becomes something that we do. This is where the trust matters. This is where the work comes in. But then we need to return to what we know is real and true. And what Easter tells us, what it points toward, what it tells us is real and true, is that while awful and terrible and no good, bad things will happen, at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, despite all the wrongness and all the evil that can be inflicted on us, or we can even inflict on others, despite all of that, the truth is, the reality is, this is God's world, and God is here, renewing, repairing, and restoring, and transforming everything and everyone in love. That is what we have faith in. That is what we know to be real and true. That while those things do happen, they do not get the last word, because this is God's world and God is good. And now some of you might be thinking like, well, that's the most unsatisfying answer you can possibly give. Yeah, I'm with you. Yep. It is. I would love it to work otherwise. I would love to be like, oh, well, that takes care of that. That's easy. Cool, done, check. No more despair. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. But I hear you. And this is why faith matters. This is why the trust matters. Because while it doesn't undo it all, what it does do, and this is the most beautiful thing, but also the unsatisfying thing, is it makes a little bit of space for hope. And if you can find a little bit of hope, even in all of the darkness and all the tension, a little bit of hope is enough. Because it's there in that hope that we can find the courage to do the one thing we have to do after we remember what is real and true and good. Because if Easter is true, if resurrection is real, if that is our hope, if it is true that the worst thing is not the last thing, that death is not the end, that this is God's world, that it's too early to give up, if we can take a moment to hope and ground ourselves there, take a little bit of breath and be like, okay, I know that is true, we find our response to evil. And a response to evil is always going to be we resist. The response to evil is resistance. We respond with resistance to evil, injustice, and suffering by remembering what is real and true and saying, no, that is not the way the world works. Those things will not have the final word. We respond by showing up in ways that prove this is not the end, by not being defeated, by not giving up, by not surrendering. We respond by embodying a vision that is greater than hate. We respond by building tables instead of walls. We respond by not giving up on people who think differently than we do, but choosing to love them and get to know them and choose understanding and play the long game of compassion and relationships. We respond with calling for change and transformation by protesting and lamenting. We respond with civil disobedience. We respond by speaking truth to power. We respond by hoping for something new and bigger and better. And in all that we are and all that we do, we resist evil by showing others, including ourselves, that this is God's world and God is not finished with it yet. We respond with resistance because ultimately, resurrection is our word for defiance. It is our word for defying the things that say otherwise and saying, no, you are not true. This might be happening, this might be real, but it will not last because there is something bigger, deeper, and better than this. And I know resurrection does happen and God will win. That's what we do. We resist. We resist. And you might be thinking, even that sounds a little unsatisfying. And again, you're like, yeah, it does. I get you. But if you look back and you look at every single movement that has transformed our world, if you look at the abolishing of slavery, if you look at the women's suffrage movement, if you look at the crusade for LGBTQ rights, if you look at environmentalism, every single one began with resistance and defiance. Every single one of those things began with Harvey Milk saying no. Every single one of those things began with one man saying, I think we should abolish the slave trade. Not abolish slavery, but the trade. Every single one of those things began with women being like, but I'm a person. I should vote too. And in those small acts of resistance, hope gets created, and other people realize that does not need to be the way it is because there is something bigger and better and more beautiful happening here. Our job is to remember, to resist, and to act. And so, as evil, awful, terrible things happen in us and around us, what will you do? What will you remember? How will you resist and defy death and evil and sin and choose to step forward in hope, knowing that this is God's world?